The sun beat down on the cracked asphalt when the truck stopped with a dry thud on the shoulder of Route 66, 40 kilometers from any shade. Inside the air-conditioned cab, Ben Ernst, he glanced at the flashing dashboard with the same expression he used to look at late employees, a refined, almost aristocratic impatience. He owned a distribution company with 22 trucks, 3 farms, and a surname that opened doors throughout the state's interior. The driver was already outside, staring at the engine with the look of someone who wasn't going to fix anything. Ben got out slowly, adjusted the collar of his linen shirt, and scanned the landscape with his eyes. There was no repair shop. There was no cell phone signal. There was only the humid afternoon heat, the empty road, and a man crouched under an old pickup truck about 100 meters ahead. The man's name was Calvin Green, 43 years old, with calloused hands from working since he was 12, a sun-faded sleeveless shirt. He was repairing his own vehicle by the roadside, his tools neatly arranged on the ground with a care that didn't match the appearance of the place. Ben approached with the gait of someone accustomed to arriving and being served. He looked Calvin up and down, then at the rusty truck, and didn't try to hide what he was thinking. "Do you know anything about engines?" His voice came out with the lightness of someone who thinks he's doing a favor just by asking. Calvin slowly raised his eyes, unhurriedly, and didn't answer immediately. He just wiped his hands on the cloth and waited, like someone who had seen this type of man many times before. Ben. He explained the problem with the arrogance of someone stating the obvious to someone he assumed wouldn't understand. The truck had broken down. The driver didn't know what was wrong. And he needed to continue his journey because he had a meeting that afternoon worth more money than Calvin probably saw in an entire year. He said this without saying it, but the message came through whole, clear, without noise. Then came the phrase, thrown into the air with a wide smile, as if it were a gift being given for free. "Fix this truck for me, and I'll pay you double what you charge." There was a laugh at the end. A short laugh, like a man who thinks he already knows how the story will end. Calvin looked at the truck. He looked at Ben. And for the first time, something passed through his eyes. Not anger, not surprise. It was almost pity, as if he knew exactly what was about to happen. Calvin Green. He had spent 20 years inside engines, not the way the rich do, paying others to understand for them. The real way. The way someone who disassembled his first engine at 14 in a backyard workshop in Pirapora, do bom Jesus, without a manual, without a course, only with the guidance of an uncle who spoke little and showed everything. He had learned mechanics like someone learning a native language, through total immersion, through trial and error, through the smell of hot oil and the sound of each part responding or resisting. Over time, he developed a skill that more experienced mechanics recognized as rare. He listened to the engine, not metaphorically. He understood, through the vibration, the rhythm, the silence between cycles, exactly what was failing. What Ben didn't know, and couldn't have known, because he never really looked at Calvin, was that the man in the faded shirt had been a mechanical engineer for 8 years, a graduate of the Polytechnic Senior High School of Texas. Calvin Green had an office in Oklahoma, a team and corporate clients, until a wrong decision by a partner, a debt that wasn't his, and a lawsuit that took 4 years to resolve consumed everything. Not his competence, not his knowledge. It was only money, position, and appearance that the world uses to decide who deserves respect. He had slowly rebuilt his life, returning to what he knew how to do with his hands while opening the company in the countryside with his own resources. But in Ben's eyes, he was just a man covered in grease on the side of a road. Calvin's old pickup truck wasn't neglected. He could have bought a new car in the last 2 years, but he'd preferred to invest every penny in the new workshop he was opening in Shamrock. with computerized diagnostic equipment that many dealerships in the region still lacked. The simple appearance was just that, an appearance. Inside, Calvin carried a technical map of nearly 30 years of experience with diesel, turbocharged, hybrid, and direct injection engines. He had even consulted for a European automaker during a sabbatical, a detail not evident in any of the clothes he was wearing at that moment. Ben looked at him and saw what? USA. He often sees him as a calloused-handed man on the side of a road, nothing more than that. Ben's driver, a young man named Cody, he watched the scene from afar with the discomfort of someone who wanted to disappear. He knew his boss well enough to know that that tone, polite on the surface, cruel underneath, could escalate without warning. Cody had tried before stopping the truck. He had called 2 mechanics he knew, but neither was available to work on that road at that hour. The cell phone signal kept coming and going, and the deadline for Ben's meeting was approaching. There was something that Cody. He noticed, but didn't say anything. When Calvin crouched down to look at Ben's truck, the look he gave the engine wasn't that of a man considering whether to accept the job. It was the look of someone who had already diagnosed the problem before even opening the hood. Calvin. He remained silent for almost 30 seconds after Ben finished speaking. It was a strange, dense silence, the kind that fills the space. Ben filled the void with more words, repeated the price, added urgency, mentioned the meeting, used the distributor's name as if it were an argument. Calvin didn't respond to any of it. He simply walked to the truck, opened the hood with a confident gesture, and began to examine the engine with an attention that had method, that had sequence, that had its own language. Ben watched without understanding what he was seeing. Cody watched and understood everything. There was something in that posture, in the way Calvin touched each part without hesitation, like someone rereading a familiar text, that said, without a word, that this man knew exactly where the problem was. Calvin. He opened the truck's hood with a precise movement, without the hesitation of someone trying to appear knowledgeable. He leaned over the engine, closed his eyes for 2 seconds, a small, almost ritualistic gesture, and then began to run his fingers over each component, like a musician testing the keys of an instrument he hasn't played in years but has never forgotten. Ben stood behind him, arms crossed, his sunglasses reflecting the hot asphalt. Cody stepped back a few more paces. The silence had a texture there, the hum of the heat, the distant chirping of birds, the weak wind that offered no relief. Calvin pointed to a specific point in the fuel injection system without saying a word, simply looking at the part with the concentration of someone reading a familiar phrase in a language only he understands. "How long has this truck been losing power on inclines?" Calvin asked without turning around. Ben opened his mouth to answer and stopped. He stared at the back of the man's neck. The question had come across wrong. Wrong because it was too technical, too precise, the kind a roadside mechanic wouldn't ask before hearing the engine start, before asking for the manual, before charging for the visit. Cody answered for his boss. About 3 months. Calvin nodded slowly. Clogged fuel filter, irregular crankshaft position sensor reading, and the fuel injection pump operating below the minimum pressure limit. The truck didn't just die now. It's been dying for weeks. Ben uncrossed his arms. Those words had a different weight. The weight of someone who doesn't guess, the weight of someone who knows. Ben. He took 2 steps forward and stood beside Calvin. It was the movement of someone wanting to regain control of a conversation that had slipped. "Can you fix this here or not?" His voice had lost some of its polish. There was urgency underneath now, not entirely disguised. Calvin straightened up, wiped his hands on the cloth, and looked at Ben for the first time since he had begun the diagnosis. He looked calmly, with the specific calm of someone being held accountable for something they haven't even agreed to do yet. "I have the parts in the truck bed. but I need to know if you want a temporary fix to get to town or if you want the problem truly solved." Ben blinked. It was a simple question. But there was something about it that bothered him. The choice was being handed to him in a way that felt like an evaluation. Ben's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. It was his advisor, for the third time. The meeting was at 4 o'clock, with a group of investors from Campinas who had waited weeks for this meeting. There was a lot of money at stake, an expansion of the distribution company to 2 more states, an exclusivity contract that would change the size of the entire company. And he was stopped on the shoulder of Route 66, sweating, depending on a man who wore sandals and had grease under his fingernails. Ben hung up without answering and stared at Calvin with a hardened expression. "You really solve this, and I'll pay double what you charge." He said it forcefully now, without the smile from before. It was an order with a price. Calvin looked at him for a moment. "Fine, but I'll tell you the price when it's over." Cody watched from afar and felt his stomach clench. Something was happening there that went beyond mechanics. It was that silent game between 2 men who still didn't know, one completely, the other in parts, who the other truly was. Ben was used to being the power center in any situation. Money had guaranteed that for so long that he had confused wealth with competence and position with authority. Calvin, on the other hand, had spent years being invisible to men like Ben. He had learned that invisibility has 2 sides. It humiliates you, but it also protects you. And sometimes it protects you until the moment you no longer need it. Cody sensed that moment was approaching, without being able to say exactly why. Calvin opened the truck bed, and Ben saw the tools. Not the makeshift tools of an informal mechanic. There was an organized metal case with dividers, with packaged parts, including a portable automotive scanner that Ben had only seen at dealerships. There was a fuel injection pressure gauge. There was the kind of inventory a diagnostic professional carries when they know what they're doing before leaving home. Ben's silence this time was different. It wasn't impatience. He said nothing. He swallowed the discomfort with the same reflex he used to hide anything he didn't understand, and stood there, arms crossed again, as if the posture could restore the distance that had begun to disappear. Calvin. He worked silently for 40 minutes. He replaced the filter, adjusted the sensor, calibrated the pump pressure with the portable equipment. At no point did he ask for help. At no point did he explain what he was doing. At no point did he show unnecessary effort. There was an economy of movement, the economy of someone who had done this hundreds of times and no longer needed to prove anything to himself. Ben stayed in the shadow of the truck, alternating between his cell phone and his eyes fixed on Calvin's hands. At some point, he stopped looking at his cell phone. He just stared at the hands. There was something hypnotic about that silent precision. Something that didn't match the narrative Ben had constructed in the first 30 seconds after seeing that man crouched by the side of the road. When Calvin started the engine, the sound was clean. Ben knew that truck. He knew the rumble, the slight tremor of the cab, the way the gauge climbed. The engine was responding differently now, not differently than when it had stopped, but differently than weeks ago, before the gradual loss of power that Cody had mentioned almost unintentionally. It was better. It was right. Ben stepped off the running board and stood on the ground, looking at Calvin, who was closing the hood with the same neutral gesture of someone completing a task as expected. "How much is it?" Ben asked. The voice had changed. It wasn't meek, it wasn't humble, but there was something different about it. A tone that Cody had never heard before from his boss. Almost respect. Almost. Calvin. He calmly dried his hands on the cloth, folded the fabric, put it in his back pocket, and only then looked at Ben. 2,400 reais, he said with the naturalness of someone announcing the time. Ben smiled quickly, almost reflexively. "Okay, I said I'd pay double." He took out his cell phone to make a transfer. And it was at that moment, the exact moment when the phone was in his hand and his thumb was navigating to the bank app, that he asked, without thinking, with the lightness of a conversation at the end of a job, "Do you work around here? Do you have a workshop?" Calvin answered without haste, "I'm opening one in E2, imported equipment, computerized diagnostics, I service fleets." Ben slowly raised his head. There was something in that sentence that didn't fit the picture he had constructed. "Education?" The word slipped out before Ben could properly phrase the question. There was a new curiosity there, not the condescending curiosity from the beginning, but something else. Calvin stared at the man for a full second before answering. "Mechanical engineering, polytechnic." 2 words, short, direct, with no need to impress. Ben stood still. His cell phone remained in his hand, unlocked. The screen lit. Cody looked at the ground. The heat remained the same. The asphalt remained cracked. The sun remained in the same place. But something had shifted in the space between the two men. Ben was intelligent enough to recognize when he had misread, but clever enough not to admit it aloud yet. So he remained silent, and his silence said more than any words could have. What happened in the next 30 seconds was small on the outside and enormous on the inside. Ben completed the transfer, 4,800 reais, double what had been promised, and held out his cell phone for Calvin to confirm receipt. Calvin looked at the notification, put his own phone in his pocket, and nodded. Without smiling, without commenting, without taking advantage of the moment to turn the tables, to demand with words what had been taken at the beginning of the conversation. He simply closed the truck bed, threw the toolbox in its proper place, and began to prepare to leave. It was this gesture, the absence of triumph, the silent refusal to humiliate, that finally broke something inside Ben. Not all of his arrogance, but a part of it. The part that was still able to recognize when he had met someone greater than he expected. Calvin was already inside the truck when Ben lightly tapped on the window. A gesture Ben himself hadn't planned. It came from his body before reaching his head. Calvin rolled down the window. Ben was standing in the sun, now without sunglasses, the linen shirt clinging to his back with sweat. And there was something different about his posture, his shoulders slightly open, his chin not quite raised. "You said you service fleets." It wasn't a question. It was the beginning of a sentence he was still constructing. Calvin waited. "I have 22 trucks. Half of them have over 800,000 kilometers. The maintenance costs are bankrupting me because no workshop I've hired so far can truly do preventative maintenance." Calvin listened without blinking. "I know how to fix that." The answer was that simple. Ben. He spent the next 10 minutes listening, just listening. Calvin talked about predictive maintenance, about the cost of letting an engine degrade due to a lack of correct diagnosis, about how most fleets spend 3 times more on corrective maintenance than they would on well-done preventive maintenance. He spoke with the confidence of someone who wasn't trying to sell anything. He was simply describing the reality of a problem he knew with surgical precision. Ben recognized that tone. It was the tone he himself used when talking about logistics to those who didn't understand the subject. It was the tone of someone who is an expert. And for the first time that afternoon, he felt he was on the other side of the table, the side of someone who needs the knowledge the other person has, not the other way around. Cody. He observed the scene from afar with an expression that mixed surprise and something akin to relief. The boss had a notepad in his hand. He always carried an old habit, and he was writing. Ben Ernst, who had arrived on that road as if the world were an extension of his will, was noting what a man in a faded shirt and sandals was saying on the side of Route 66. There was a silent justice in that which didn't need to be celebrated aloud to be real. The sun was already lower. The Campina's meeting had been rescheduled. Ben himself had requested it half an hour earlier, without explaining the reason to his assistant. Some things matter more than the scheduled time. He had discovered this too late that day, but he had discovered it. The turning point didn't come with confrontation. It didn't come with dramatic revelation, with documents, with witnesses, or with raised voices. It came in the hardest and truest way, through recognition. Ben looked at Calvin and said, in the voice of someone paying an internal price while speaking, "I underestimated you back then. That was my mistake." Calvin was silent for a moment. It wasn't the silence of someone savoring something. It was the silence of someone who had waited for it for too long to still feel satisfaction in it. "It happens quite often," he replied. Just that. 3 words that carried years. Ben received them without looking away, and it was in that instant that the richest man on that road understood that the intelligence he had bought throughout his life had never sat in the back of an old pickup truck waiting to be seen. Before leaving, Calvin handed over a simple card, no logo, no title, just his name and number. Ben held the card with both hands, not out of ceremony, but because he was really looking at it, reading each letter as if that small piece of paper weighed more than everything he had signed that month. "Call me when the shop opens," Ben said. Calvin started the truck's engine, which started on the first turn, and looked at the road ahead. "Don't worry, I'll call you beforehand. I still have about 3 months of appointments to fill." And he drove off, without haste, without waving, without looking in the rearview mirror. Ben stood on the shoulder, card in hand, the truck purring behind him, and for the first time that day, he was the one watching the other drive away. 3 weeks later, Ben Ernst entered Calvin Vidal's new workshop in Itu for the first time. It was a spacious warehouse, the smell of fresh paint still lingering in the air, equipment installed in an organization that resembled a laboratory more than a garage. 2 young employees were working quietly, a truck from another company already on the lift. Ben arrived without an assistant, without a driver, without the collar of his linen shirt turned up. He arrived alone, in his own car, on a Thursday morning, the kind of appointment he never scheduled without a business commitment behind it. But this time, he had scheduled it without a second thought. Calvin greeted him with a firm handshake and led him straight to the technical area, without a meeting room, without coffee served on a tray. Respect there was shown in another way, by the time given, by the genuine attention, by the absence of performance. The contract was signed that same day. 22 trucks under quarterly predictive maintenance, with individualized technical reports for each vehicle and a plan for replacing components before failure. It was the kind of service Ben had tried to contract twice before with larger, well-known companies, with nice websites, PDF proposals with colorful logos. And it had never worked because the real knowledge wasn't there. It was in a man he had almost ignored on an empty road. There was an irony in that Ben couldn't completely shake when he thought about it. And he thought about it more often than he would admit to anyone. Life had chosen that specific way to teach him. And the lesson had arrived in the heat of the moment, without warning, without a frame, without any possibility of escape. The last truck left Calvin's workshop one October afternoon, serviced with a printed and signed technical report. Cody went to pick it up and stood still for a moment before getting into the cab, looking at the warehouse with the expression of someone recognizing a place that matters without being able to explain exactly why. Calvin was in the back, leaning over another engine, his hands in the right place, his eyes in the right place. The same silence as always. There was a photo on the wall of the small office, a younger Calvin, dark suit, diploma in hand, smiling at a camera. No one had put it there to impress anyone. It was there because it was true. And sometimes the truth doesn't need a stage, doesn't need an announcement, doesn't need the right moment. It just needs enough time to appear. If this story touched you in any way, leave a like and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next ones.